I felt that everybody I met on this path of life had something to share with me. I really believed in that. I call it believing in angels because I met so many incredible people in my life. So I looked at the camera as both a time machine and a compass that guided me to people I needed to meet.
You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. For 50 years, B&H has been the professional source for photography, video, audio, and more. For your favorite gear, news, and reviews, visit us at bnh.com or download the B&H app to your iPhone or Android device. Now here's your host, Derek Fassbender.
Welcome, listeners. I'm Derek Fassbender, host of the B&H Photography Podcast.
And I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast senior creative producer.
And I'm Mike Weinstein, the show's technical producer and audio engineer.
When it comes to making pictures, Jamel Shabazz knows what he wants. Yet, beyond the rich tapestry created through his trend-setting street portraits and candid scenes, Jamel's most meaningful role might be that of a street teacher, touching the lives of the people in front of his lens and inviting them to mark their place in history. In today's show, we're privileged to chat with this archivist of street culture. But before we start, here's a bit more about our distinguished guest. Jamel Shabazz is a documentary, fashion, and street photographer from Brooklyn who has spent more than 4 decades capturing the cultural shifts and struggles of New York City through iconic photographs. His pictures have been exhibited worldwide, are permanently housed in prestigious institutions, and currently featured in 9 monographs along with more than 36 other photo books. A recipient of the 2018 Gordon Parks Award and the Gordon Parks Foundation Steidel Book Prize in 2022, Jamel is also dedicated to education, having instructed young students through programs at the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Schomburg Center, and the Bronx Museum. As a member of the Kamoinge Photo Collective and a board member of Foco, Jamel's artistic mission remains centered on preserving urban history and culture through powerful, intimate portraits. Jamel Shabazz, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor.
It is an honor to have you on. I could have just summed that up in one sentence and we have living legend Jamel Shabazz on.
No living legend. I'm living, but I'm not a legend.
Look, anybody who's walked the streets of New York, seen the streets of New York, has taken a camera out in the streets of New York, knows your work. Even if they don't know your work, they know your work. So it truly is an honor to have you on. I want to start with how you grew up, and your father was a professional photographer. So you didn't just grow up around cameras and photos. You grew up with the profession of being a professional photographer. I want to know if you have early memories, or is there one that stands out of growing up that really drilled into you the importance that photographs have in people's lives?
One of the greatest memories I have early on is my father sitting at our coffee table organizing the family photo albums. And he would have on some jazz bebop music, and he would just be very serious in his zone putting together these albums. And that always fascinated me because he would do this, it seemed like 5 days out of the week. So he was really committed to preserving the history and culture. And as a young child, I was just fascinated in seeing how he worked. And then later on, I would go to the albums upon completion and I'd start to analyze what he created. And I was blown away because I'm looking at a lot of dynamic family images from my grandfather, my great-grandfather, a lot of my uncles and aunts in military uniform. And it just blew me away. And it helped me to understand at that point the importance of preserving the history and culture. So it was at that stage where I fell in love with photography.
It's interesting that you just kind of gravitated to it. And, some people, it's like, I have an 8-year-old son. I put a camera in his hands. It found its way onto the shelf and onto the floor and lost. And then, it took some time and he picked it back up. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, all right, well, do I teach him about the importance? Does he understand it? So I'm kind of interested from your perspective. Was this something that he taught to you? Like, did he actively teach you about the importance of the photograph, or was it something that more you just gravitated to?
Yes, I think early on, my father and I, we never really had conversation about what he was doing. I just watched him. It wasn't until I came home from the military in 1980 that he saw my interest in photography and he put me under the wing. But during the early stages of my development, I have to say I was about 7, 8 years old, I was very curious about the world around me. The war in Vietnam was going on. We had the civil rights movement going on and the anti-war protests. And we had a subscription to Life magazine, Look magazine. So I was always surrounded by a lot of publications that While my peers were looking at comic books, I was drawn towards these photography books and these publications, and it produced a curiosity to want to know what was going on. In addition to watching the evening news every night and seeing Walter Cronkite speak about the war in Vietnam, I became intrigued. My father never spoke to me about it, nor my mother. And even when I was going to private school, no one brought up the issue of Vietnam and the civil rights movement. So I was compelled to learn it on my own. And unbeknownst to my parents, I would pick up these publications. I would look at the globe to find out where these places were at. I would go through my encyclopedias to learn more about Vietnam and Alabama, Mississippi. And I would have my dictionary out, and I would just start to analyze words to have a better understanding. What happened too around that same time, my father had a signed copy of Leonard Freed's book, Black and White America, and it was set prominently on the coffee table next to the photo albums. So I started to pick up that book at a very early age, and it started to expose me to a world outside of my Brooklyn apartment. And at that point, I started to really understand the power of photography and the photographer and the importance of visual storytelling. So it just sparked a curiosity that never left me. And when I would finish reading my father's publications, I would go to the local library and I would get stacks of back issues of Life magazine, Look, National Geographic, and I would read all of them. And then I would go on to the foreign magazines like French Match and Spiegel and look at those publications to get a glimpse of what was going on in the world, because I was really curious. The war in Vietnam had impacted my community, and I vividly remember a lot of young men that were being drafted and going to war. I even remember men that didn't come back, and when military personnel came to inform loved ones that they had died in the war. And at the same time, absolutely no one is explaining this to me. And in a sense, I'm traumatized behind the images because another thing that my father did, he was into war photography. So he brought home a lot of books by Tim Page, Larry Burroughs, Philip Jones Griffin, Don McCullen. And now I'm getting another perspective of the war. Unlike watching the news and the magazines, I'm looking at these books. And it's really just drawing my curiosity in to want to know what's going on in this world that I'm living in. I'm a little traumatized because this is the world I'm embarking on. In conjunction to the assassinations that were going on, these magazines fed my mind in a way that I wasn't getting in school. So I was constantly hungry for more and more. And I found that through photography books, I was able to learn this visual language that really enhanced my understanding of the world around me.
It's so fascinating and it's so relevant even to today where everybody has a camera on them. And we've learned as a society that we don't have to turn on the news, to get information, to get perspective. Everybody has a camera. Everybody can tell their own story. We have boots on the ground essentially all over. So it's just interesting to me to hear decades ago, before we had the technology, we still had the means to create that interest in learning what was going on around you. Now, did this affect the way you photographed when you picked up a camera for the first time and started photographing?
I'm not going to say the first time because I picked up the camera at about 14, 15 years old. And I just decided to do snapshots of my friends in junior high school, very much like the family photo albums that weren't based off documentary images. It was just snapshots of just family members. So when I first picked up the camera, I just photographed my peers, just basic images of just individuals posed against brick walls and gates, but nothing documentary. That idea came when I came home from the military because my appreciation and understanding of photography had been enhanced through my study overseas. So when I came home concerned about what was going on in the world around me, from prostitution to homelessness to mental illness to veterans from both Vietnam, Korea, and World War II. And I now wanted to train my lens towards those situations to better understand it. I'll say at 20 years old, upon coming home from the Army, that my whole perspective changed from the traditional snapshots to focus more on just documenting the social conditions in my neighborhood. But I also included the portraits of my peers in terms of going to the high schools and speaking to young people. I focused on portraits, but I was really drawn more early on to just document the social conditions.
Interesting. And it's funny, your images of people on the street is probably what you're most known for, especially in New York. Everyone that knows your work that is from New York is from this area. My first introduction to your images was images on the street of just the everyday people in your neighborhood. And the one thing that always stood out and resonated with me was you captured the joy of just the everyday moment and the connection. And it's that human connection that really stood out for me. Can you talk a little bit, Jamel, about those early days of finding your footing, just capturing people and the effect that it had on people and what you saw in people that affected you as a photographer and how that shaped your career?
That's a great question. I think about what frequency I was on when I first came home from the Army. I go back to the music I was listening to. Marvin Gaye, What's Happening, Brother. So that was like the music that played in my ear as I traveled around because I just came back to America. I was gone for 3 years and I wanted to know what was going on. And I came home to a war zone, sadly. A lot of young men were dying at the hands of other young men. And I was very concerned about that because prior to going in the military, it wasn't like that. Within that short amount of time, the situation in the community changed drastically. And I felt as an elder that I had a responsibility to find out what was going on. So one of the first things that I did, I would go to two local high schools in my community, Samuel J. Tilden during the daytime and Erasmus during the afternoon. And I went there. And the good thing about that experience, a lot of the kids that were attending school at that time, they were the little brothers and sisters of my friends. So I had already had a relationship with them. So I went up to the school that I went to and I would tell them that I just came home from the military and I wanted to know what was going on. What people don't really realize is that prior to taking a photograph, there was a conversation. In my early work, everybody is pretty much high school students from those two particular schools. So I engaged them in conversation, informing them of who I was, that I just came home from the service, and I had a genuine concern about their future. I didn't want them to make the same missteps that I made when I was in high school. So I came to speak to them about the importance of education, the importance of respecting each other, respecting our community. And then I would take the photograph as evidence of the conversation. And later on, I would go to my lab and I would develop the images. In some cases, I would go to the one-day lab and bring the pictures back and develop relationships with them. After school, I might take some kids to the local store. We would get orange juice and have conversation. And we would just speak. And to my surprise, I was photographing a lot of enemies of each other because I might photograph one area in each Flatbush and then go to Flatbush. And I didn't realize that these kids had beef with each other, but they all welcomed me the same way. I became known as like a big brother to a lot of people because, first of all, I was willing to take the time to engage them in conversation. And then I saw the value in photographing them. And I didn't want anything in return. There was no unseen motives. I just was concerned with their well-being and I wanted everybody to succeed in life. So in giving them the photographs, it helped to build the relationship. And each time I went to the schools to pass on the photographs, my audience became bigger and bigger. And that's pretty much how I started out, just building relationships. After school, I would walk the neighborhood and see these kids again and photograph them. I carried a chessboard with me. I was willing to teach them chess because I felt that was an essential game that we needed to know to navigate through the game of life. So I would teach a lot of kids chess. I was a vegetarian at that time, so I taught them the importance of health and nutrition. So I was just concerned with the well-being of young people. And this was during the time when the AIDS epidemic had hit. And a lot of people were dying from this mysterious disease. And I felt something negative on the horizon. I didn't quite know what it was. But as a couple years would pass, it was the crack epidemic. So to me, it was a race against time to try to save as many of these young people as I could. And I was foolish at that time because I felt that the military served as a great outlet for people to advance themselves. So in the early days, I was encouraging people to consider the military. Unlike me, who went in as an infantryman, I was encouraging them to take up a skill that would help them build a foundation in the later years.
And one of the things that jumps out to me is you're having these conversations on the street, and I love that you're talking about how you can have people from warring factions. You know, you could have somebody from this block and somebody from this block who don't get along. But one of the powerful things about photography and street photography in particular, or photographs taken with people you meet on the street to broaden it, is that it's a level playing field. It's a one-on-one or you with a group of people, and nothing else matters at that point other than the interaction. And a lot of times we aren't talking about issues of the world. We aren't talking about, anything other than, hey, what's going on, man? How are you? How are you feeling? I'm sharing a little bit with you. You're sharing a little bit with me. I'm learning. You're learning. I'm capturing a piece of you by taking a portrait, but you're building a relationship in that one-on-one setting, which I think is so powerful to photography. Did you realize it at the time how powerful it was what you were doing? I mean, even educating people and just sharing your time with people on the street means a lot to people.
Yes. I will find out years later, like even now, I receive so many letters from young people I photographed 20, 30, 40 years ago, and they telling me that some of the things I told them changed their lives. Many of them picked up the camera. My father fell victim to alcoholism due to his PTSD. So I was trying to get people to be mindful of their health and get off the cigarettes. I was really adamant about that. I hated cigarettes. I would just try to encourage kids to get off. And like I said, over the years, due to social media, I've reconnected with so many of them, and they reminded me of the different things which I've told them to say, it's because of you that I stopped smoking cigarettes at 18 years old. It's because of you that I decided to go into the military and make a career out of it. It's because of you that I went on to take different civil service examinations. I'm now retired. I get those letters a lot, and that really warms my heart because I believed in civil service early on. One of the things my father told me was when you come home from the military, like my uncles and family members, they all went into civil service to get foundation. So I told a lot of young people that, and all of them are retired right now. And they thank me for that because they weren't aware of it. Nobody really told them. So I wasn't really aware of the impact I was having until recently when my book Back in the Days came out, which allowed me to reconnect with so many people which I photographed. And then they started to give testimonies of the things which I've told them. And to the point now that I'm friends due to social media with so many people I might have only met for 5 minutes. I have now reconnected with them and built an even greater relationship beyond anything I could ever have imagined at that point.
Wow. I mean, that's a testament to the power. And it's like you're doing this at a time when images aren't being uploaded online. You're not seeing them globally. It's like, now are you sharing? Were you going back and sharing these images, printing them out and sharing them with people? I'm interested in like how much of the relationship was developed as far as taking this image of somebody, connecting with them, staying in touch with them, sharing the images with them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I got a business card made and I had people call me if they wanted copies of the prints. And I always made it a point to reconnect with them and pass those prints on. In many cases, I knew I would see them at similar locations. There were certain areas I would just be at a lot. I spent a lot of time on Church and Flatbush Avenue, which is like the heart of that particular area. I was at the old Dutch church, has been around since the 1600s. That became my base camp. So a lot of people would come there and I would have the photographs in portfolios and I would make double copies and I would always pass on a copy to them. And it meant a lot to me for them to see it. Unlike today with digital photography, you take a photograph, you show them the back of it. Back then it was about trust. So I wanted to
Hmm.
build that trust with them. So by giving them a copy of the photograph, it didn't cost me anything and it made them feel good. And then what would happen with that is when I passed on that print, they would share it with their friends who maybe I didn't know and that they wanted me to photograph them. So that was my strategy to build relationships and strengthen them by connecting with more people. And they were just amazed because nobody was really giving out free photographs. To me, it was a small thing. Once I set up my darkroom in my laundry room, I was able to give them 8x10 prints at no cost. I told them this is all for the love. If you want to get me anything, just get me a quarter orange juice and we could split that and we could have conversation. But I never wanted anything really in terms of finance. It was all done out of love. And it made me feel good for a lot of kids to tell me that that picture that you gave me back in 1981, my mother still has it framed in our family wall unit. So I'm happy to have been a contributor to preserving some of their history from that era because nobody was really doing what I was doing back then. I was one of the few people that actually had a 35 millimeter doing that type of photography.
You were known as the guy walking around with the cameras. Did you develop like a persona?
They called me cameraman. So
Cameraman.
I didn't like that name. I prefer to be called by my name, but cameraman worked. And so, for those that didn't know me, they said they go cameraman. So I was cool with that.
Mhm. I'm interested how you see yourself as a photographer because you do a little bit of everything. I mean, I know we love to brand things. We love to say street photographer. And then you get along and you're like, well, I don't just photograph the streets. I photograph anything I like. Or if I see something and I like it, I photograph it. How do you see yourself as a photographer, Jamel?
I look at myself to a degree as an alchemist, and I look at it as having the ability to freeze time in motion. And that's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. When you see something that captures your eye, and then you're able to see it and freeze that moment. And then 20, 30, 40 years later, you throw out that moment and you share it with the world. I think that's incredible. And even for me today, through social media again, to have seen an image back in 1980, like for example, I took a photograph of these four young kids in a car. They were waiting for their father to come out. One of the kids was on the driver's side. They were packed in the car like it was theirs. And I photographed that picture in 1980. I posted it probably 2 years ago. And these kids reached out to me on Instagram saying, that is us. That's
Wow.
me and my cousins. And my cousins are at the driver's seat as a doctor. I'm a lawyer. My other cousin is in the real estate. And here I have these little kids, this image that I had for me, just for me in my personal photo albums. But now to take this frozen moment, throw it out, share it on my social media feed that has the ability to reach over 170,000 people and reconnect with these kids who are now grown men and they're all successful. That is phenomenal for me. So I look at myself as in a sense, an alchemist, that I'm able to just freeze the moment in time. And I may not understand why I did it, as I tell a lot of my students, it may not make sense now, but it's going to make sense later. So much of what I've done back in the days is now making sense because I'm reconnecting with so many people in which I'm photographing. And it amazes me because in most cases, I might be on a train and see a situation, photograph that person, and I may never see them again. But now, since I've done books and my name has become popular with Document That Era, a lot of people are now reaching out to me looking for pictures of themselves, their mothers, their fathers every day. And in a lot of cases, I actually have those photographs. So I'm grateful for this role that I have. I don't even look at it as photography no more because there's been a debate about my work being street photography. So it's like, I just record history and culture right now. I don't like titles too much, because it's just too much
Mm.
debate behind that. So if anything, I'm just a regular photographer. I just want to be a good person that sees the value of things around me.
That's such a beautiful take, and it's one of the things that interests me is going on and seeing the commentary on one of your photos, like, "Oh, I remember this person. I remember seeing them around the way," or, "Oh, this is XYZ from over here," and it's like,
Yes.
it is cool to see, and I think that's one of the really cool things about photography is that it's one of the few things in life that appreciates with time. Most things depreciate, they lose value. Photography, the further we get away from that moment,
Yes.
the more important it is. And like you said, in documenting these moments, in freezing time, you're capturing something that we can't get back, and we only appreciate it more the further we get away from it. And that's one of the things with your images that honestly, it inspires me when I go out and I take an image that I look at and I'm like, do I really want to take this? And I'm like, well, you know what? In 30 years, ask myself now how I'm going to look at this image in 30 years. And you know what? I usually end up pressing the shutter because of images that I see where I'm like, you know what? Jamel, and now that I have you on here, I could ask you, man. So it's like when you're walking around, it's like, what stops you? Or growing up, when you were getting started, what would stop you in your tracks and say, I want to take a photo?
I think the cornerstone of my work is really love. And when I see love, love could be a man and his dog. Love could be two best friends. Love could be a father and his son. Love is what really draws me into an image. Or if it's a solo individual, it's just a person's energy that he or she might be on at that time. I'm drawn in and I want them to know that. And in my approach, I let them know the reason why I want to take a photograph. You have a certain vibration. And I know you're somebody, and I really believe that you're going to do a lot of great things in life. And I feel the need to capture this moment. That's with the solo photographs. When it comes down to couples, even a man and dog, as a dog owner, I see the relationship between a person and their pet. So I want them to know that this is going to mean a lot as years goes on because, the dog might pass away and now you have a memory. With the love, I try to encourage it. So if I see two people that love each other, I like to just roll up on them and say, you know what, I love to capture this moment in time because it's obvious that you two really love each other. And I think that this moment needs to be documented. And not only would I want to document it, but I want to give you a copy of it to have a memory of this precious moment. If I see a young father with his son, I use it as an opportunity to encourage him and say, this is a very beautiful moment right here. In light of the fact that sometimes there's a lot of absent fathers, it's obvious that the love that you have is a very special moment. And I feel it needs to be captured. And I like to take this photograph, not only for you, but as a testament as he gets older. So it's the love and it's the ability to capture that moment and passing those photographs to people that mean a lot to me.
Jamel, one thing I'm curious about with your group pictures is the poses that the groups 4, 5, 6 people are in are just so striking. Is that just happenstance? How much of it is back and forth or instruction to the subjects?
It's a combination at times. I learned group shooting from my father when he was in the Navy. One of the things I was fascinated with is the photographs he took of the different units within the Navy. They had all the different squadrons, the electricians, the pilots, the Marines. And I was moved behind how he was able to group them in and everyone was in alignment. That no one blinked their eyes because if one person blinked their eye, it would throw off the whole photograph. So early on, I was fascinated with that ability to do it. And I took that idea into the streets. And in a lot of cases, when I would approach a group of young men or women, they might say to me, well, what do you want us to do? So now they're putting the ball in my court where now I have to figure out, okay, these women are willing to be photographed, but they don't know what to do. So I would start to create situations to put the people in size order so it can flow where nobody's blocking each other. And then I want to make the experience fun. So we would just do things like, show some love to each other. I always tell people, even to this day, show some love. And in that idea, people start to smile and embrace each other. And then there's other situations with some groups, they just know what to do, because they know, especially in the mid 80s, that they're going to be in my portfolio and people are going to look at this work. And I let them know this is going to be historic. So you want to look your best. So I want you guys to take a few seconds to think about what to do because this photograph is going to be iconic. It's going to have a lot of meaning. So they would gather together. They would talk about different poses to do, crouching down, embracing each other. So some of it is on them, but it's a 50-50 collaboration. And the idea is to make it fun and to make it phenomenal. And I want them to see that. As I might even approach a group on the street corner, I might move them from one point to another point where the lighting is better or the brick wall blends with the outfits in which they're wearing. And when they see that, they say, okay, we see where you're going at with this here. And it just makes the experience even greater when they're able to understand what I'm trying to capture.
Wow.
It's like an overall vibe. Like you're just going with the moment.
Yes.
But you have the photographer in you. It's like, I want what I want, but you're not going to over direct and kind of just let the moment happen on its own.
Right, exactly. Unless I see that it's going in a bad place. But in most cases, where I come from, these guys are naturals. You know, they all know what to do. A lot of them have been photographed before because I come from a generation of the Polaroid. So back in the old days, it was very popular to go to 42nd Street, Times Square, and get your picture taken by the Polaroid photographers back then. They were masters of that. So a lot of people had those images. So they already knew in most cases what to do when I approached them.
And just that throwback to the era of World War II, post-World War II, the bebop era almost, I can just see that in those poses.
A lot of the poses came from album covers too. When I look at groups like the Jackson 5, the Temptations, the Four Tops, the Supremes, subconsciously, as I was looking at my father's photography books, I was also fascinated with the albums. And some of the greatest poses I developed came from Earth, Wind, and Fire. You're looking at how they pose. So I just had to add the impact that those album covers had on my creative development over the many years.
Fascinating.
Yeah, that really is fascinating. At what point did you realize you wanted to do this? Like you wanted to continue this as more than just taking pictures of the people you're meeting?
I think early on, it gave me a purpose. I looked at the camera as a compass, and it now gave me a purpose to kind of like ask questions about life. Because I was a researcher, and I needed to know about Vietnam. At that time, the Vietnam veteran was about 10 years older than me. So I'm 20, he's 30, and I want to know about war. And I used to just approach people because I felt that everybody I met on this path of life had something to share with me. I really believed in that. I call it believing in angels because I met so many incredible people in my life. So I looked at the camera as both a time machine and a compass that guided me to people I needed to meet. And I would journal. So I've been journaling for about 40 years. So I had my chessboard, my camera, and my notepad, and I would meet people and take notes. So I realized at this point that this is my journey and I'm on this path to better understand life. In the beginning, there was a lot of questions because, again, I just came home from the military and there's things that I'm seeing that's bothering me. I'm in this organization and billions of dollars is used to fight wars, but yet there's homelessness on the streets. And I had questions about that. One of the very first jobs I got, I worked at Ward's Island as a security officer, and I'm looking at all these people that are homeless and broken. I'm looking at drug addiction. So I wanted to understand that. One of the first main assignments that I did, it was documenting prostitution because I saw it and it troubled me. So I would go out late at night in my area, Lincoln Terrace Park, with my tape recorder. And I can't believe I did it when I look back, that I would go out there 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and I would engage prostitutes about their life. And they would open up to me. And I said, the reason why I'm doing this here, because I want to better understand your life. And I want to use this conversation to take to the junior high schools and the high schools to have young women listen to these testaments so they won't go that direction. And to my surprise, they all gave it to me. And these were really beautiful women that happened to fall victim to that world.
Wow.
So I had a lot of questions and I want to use these experiences to better understand. I wanted to really understand Vietnam because I knew the impact that the military had on me, but I can't imagine what these men went through, particularly the ones that were drafted. So I had a lot of questions. So when I would see a person who I thought was a Vietnam veteran, it was really interesting too, because I knew in my travels that a person was in Vietnam. I would see an individual and I might ask them, with all due respect, if you don't mind me asking you a question, where was you at in 1969? And they would look at me stunned and they say, I just got drafted or I just came home from Vietnam. And it would spark conversations. I would sit with this person and we would speak for hours to better understand because, my instructors were all Vietnam veterans. I had questions. I want to know a lot of things. And I found that the average person on the street, everyone had a backstory. And I really believe that everybody I met for a reason. And in most cases, those that were willing to talk to me, they all had a story. Or those that may not have a really great story 40 years ago, Today, I'm reconnected with them, and now they're telling me stories about their life that I would never have imagined.
Man, this is so refreshing to hear. This is like a masterclass in portraiture and communicating with people. You have such a matter of fact, genuine approach. I can even feel it just through the mic here, man. I'm not even standing in front of you. And I feel like, okay, if he walked up to me on the street, like he is genuinely interested. It's not self serving. And I think that's something that, photography has gone in many directions now. And a lot of what we see created through a camera is sort of self serving or is made for a certain purpose. So, this whole dynamic of you wanting to do good, wanting to teach people, wanting to show people something about themselves, even, I think that's so beautiful. And I think that approach is so lost in the mix now. And I think back then, it was more of a simplified thing where people didn't have to worry about their image splashed all over, or people didn't have to worry about what are they going to do with this image. Did that kind of genuine nature help you get along with how you were received on the streets?
Oh, totally. I was viewed as that big brother who was sincere, who had a good heart. I put a lot of thought into everything I did. I often speak about the book that really influenced me early on, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. That really was a game changer because I started to understand body language, approach, compliments. And a lot of people weren't getting that. I dressed a certain way. So it's not like I just went out there. Everything I did was with intention. And as a chess player, I often liken that game to my strategy. And with chess, it's about having all your tools in place, having your army, willing to make a sacrifice, having a clear objective, and having opposition. For many years before I would even step out of my door, there's a few things I would do. I would work out, run a few miles. I would do a lot of stretching. So physically, I'm on point. I would play chess and I would do a little reading. So when I stepped out the door, my spiritual armor was on and I was ready to take on anything that came my way. So there was a lot of preparation to my approach. And I learned from pimps, believe it or not. It gave me one of the greatest lessons. And I speak about a situation in the documentary, Everybody's Street. And I think the viewer didn't understand it when I first mentioned the story, because it kind of like helped me to approach people rather than just taking shots without people's permission. And I was on the Lower East Side back in the early 80s, and I was just going to Delancey Street. And I happened upon a situation where a prostitute was engaged in a sex act with an individual. And I'm walking across the street, my camera's out, it's at the ready, and I raised it and I took the shot. And she screamed, and John drove off without paying her. And then all of a sudden, I was surrounded by a group of pimps, and they came at me really fast with the intentions on doing harm to me. And I had to get into a strong fighting stance. And at that time, my matter of fact, it was 83. I was a correctional officer, so I had a weapon on me. And I didn't want to use it. I didn't want to draw it. I had to diffuse the situation. And I told the leader, who was the most aggressive one, I said, just wait a minute, let me explain my intentions to you. Once he heard my voice and my tone, he immediately calmed down and he called off his troops. And I explained to him, it wasn't my intention to do this. I happened upon it. And I use these images to encourage young people to stay away from this lifestyle. He listened to me and he looked at me and he said to me, I like you. You can come out here anytime and document this world. And he told the women that too. And from that point on, I would go on to document that world for at least 5 years based off his permission. So I was able to turn a negative into a positive. And I photographed him. And I photographed him in a way in which nobody would ever know that it's a pimp and prostitute. And it's a photograph that people have seen. I don't describe it other than the title of Bittersweet. The sweet part is I was able to get the photograph. It's a photograph of a young man with 2 women and a child who's holding a cat. The bitter part is the fact that these women are prostitutes.
Mm.
And you would never know unless I told you. And this is a body of work I've never really shown before because it's still painful. But over the years, a lot of the women have since died because I would not want to shame their families and pull up an image of a woman who happened to be in that world that changed her life. So I sat on that work for many years. And now I'm about to gradually showcase it because you really can't tell who they are unless I really give you the backstory behind the images.
Interesting. Now, you were a corrections officer, as you said. It's a tough job.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about how you managed that? Was there things that you took from the street into the corrections environment that helped you?
Prior to becoming a correctional officer, I studied prison life and jail life. I learned about Attica. I learned about the jail riots in Long Binh prison in Vietnam. I watched Short Eyes. I did a lot of research. And actually, when I first came home from the Army, I reconnected with 2 associates of mine that were locked up for a crime they didn't commit. So my first lessons came from 2 men who had just came home from jail. being convicted of a really harsh crime, but they were found innocent. So when my father told me to take different civil service examinations, I did. And the correction department called me first. I had an uncle that was a correction officer. So that kind of like guided me. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would experience as an officer. It was pure hell. 1983, prior to the crack epidemic, I worked with adolescents. At that time, an adolescent was between the ages of 16 to 21 years old. I worked at a place called C74 ARDC. But prior to it, I did 8 weeks of training at the Correction Academy. One thing I wanted to do was document my entire experience. So the moment I got called to the job, to the time I was investigated, to the time I was in the academy, I documented every single aspect of the job because I wanted to have a visual diary of this experience. Unlike my missteps when I was in the military, I did not document my experience. I wanted to do it in corrections. When I got to Rikers Island, nothing could prepare me for what I was about to see because now I'm in the atmosphere with hundreds upon hundreds of young men. And thankfully, I knew a few of them and they helped to guide me through that experience. They were my best teachers because as a new jack, a lot of the senior officers not trying to talk with you. They don't want to connect with you. So you have to try to wing this on your own. And let me just give you an idea on what a housing area is like. You go into a housing area, and at that time, the detainees were all pre-trial detainees. So they weren't convicted. So they all wore civilian clothes. You have no weapon as an officer. All you have is a radio and you have a personal body alarm that if you get into a confrontation, you press it and you hope that you're going to get backup. But you work in an environment where it's 60 inmates, 30 on each side. You have one officer, the B officer, that has to work the floor and he has to deal with 60 personalities. And you have an officer behind the gate that controls the cells. So chess was very helpful for me to understand this situation because now I'm in a war. There's rooted in a lot of hatred. And jail does not stop the violence because you're in there and it's an extremely violent atmosphere and it's very sad. But I went in there to be a light. I had developed a reputation on the street. So when I went in there, a lot of folks from Brooklyn knew me and they received me well. And then I used it as an opportunity to bring my photographs into the jail to stimulate a lot of young men, to remind them of the street. Some of these guys weren't coming home for 30 years. So looking at photographs of the street meant everything to them. So early on, I started to share my photographs with a select group of detainees. And then I started to engage them in conversation. I spoke about the importance of atonement, the importance of doing good deeds. There was other young men that told me, I'm in here for a crime I didn't commit. And it was a very difficult job because you don't know what to believe. You got those that are guilty. You got those that are innocent. You got those that are in between. You got those who are trying to make the best out of a bad situation who are now falling victim to prison life and they engage in robberies and stabbings. You got another group of kids that can't take it. They want to kill themselves. So you got to negotiate all of this right here for 8 to 16 hours a day. Back then, as a rookie officer, you were doing double shifts of 16 hours a day for at least 3 days. So it weighs on you. And I have to be honest with you, in order to navigate through this, I had to read 2 books to give me balance. And one book was The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and the other book was The Art of Peace. Because you're in a war zone. You could be a very peaceful individual and you have somebody attacking you for no reason. How do you deal with that? I don't care how positive your disposition is, you're going to get somebody that doesn't like you, of course. So you got to deal with that every day. In addition to the fact you're dealing with officers and you're dealing with administration that may not like you. If I'm walking down the hallway with 60 inmates and I have to take them to the mess hall and we got to go at least 500 to 800 meters and you have 60 of them, and again, it's you and another person, and you got to walk them in a hallway and past other inmates, you had to develop a language. And I remember referring to my inmates as gentlemen. All right, gentlemen, I want you to be disciplined as we walk down the hallway, chest out, stomachs in, have a sense of pride. And the administration hated that because they called them mutts, they called them animals, they called them lowlifes. I'll never forget there was a supervisor that heard me say that. And the next day he came to our roll call and he threatened me indirectly behind the language I used. But how are you going to work in an environment with those individuals and refer them as mutts and animals? I couldn't do it. So immediately I started to have problems with the administration because I took a different approach. It was a very violent world where for conflict resolution, sometimes the staff would abuse the inmates. You might have 2 fights between 2 individuals, so you beat up everybody. I didn't understand it. So I had to develop a system on how to make this thing work. And I'm a new officer right now. So it was very challenging, but I was able to do it by having one-on-one time, talking to young men, trying to give them balance and being empathetic. One of the greatest things that came out of the Correction Academy for me was empathy. So I went in there and I dealt with empathy. In many cases, I would place myself in a cell and close the door to be reminded that it could have been me. What saved me was really the photography, because a lot of my coworkers, after dealing with such a traumatic experience, they would fall victim to drugs and alcohol to balance out the violence they saw. So for me, the photography was my outlet. I would leave Rikers Island and I would take to the street and I would look for joy. I would look for love. And that gave me hope. So the photography was my therapy. In many cases, I would go to Prospect Park. That was my place where I would just decompress from the violence and get in tune with nature and meditate and document the love and life around me. And it gave me the fortitude to return back for another day of Rikers Island. And it went on and on for 20 years. And it was relentless. And it just wasn't Rikers Island, but it's the racism I suffered on the street. I was in constant battles every single day. And it's one thing to battle the inmate population, but it's another thing to have to battle your co-workers. There was other officers that was just as empathetic as I was, but there's others that hated people. And they did things that were just horrible. You know what I mean? I witnessed a lot in jail. You're powerless. There's nothing that you could do as a rookie officer other than saying there has to be a better way. As I get seniority, I have to develop a system so we could eradicate this type of ignorance. And once I got a little time on the job, I became a training officer to the newer officers, because back in those times when the crack epidemic hit, they needed a lot of officers. So I immediately gained seniority. And through my seniority in my steady housing area, I was able to use my housing area as a test house where a lot of the rookies would come and I would train them. And in that position, I was able to produce officers that were empathetic and that were willing to be more rational than the ones that were using force.
Now, did you see an effect on how you treated these men versus how your coworkers were treating them, how the higher ups, how the status quo was for treating them? Did you see that you were getting through to people in a way that other corrections officers or other supervisors weren't?
Oh, definitely. Because as time went on, when I started working at Manhattan Supreme Court, I worked the worst area in that facility. And this is detainees preparing to go to court or detainees that are going to see a psychiatrist in the mental health unit. I worked in a combination between the mental health unit and felony court, where a lot of young men had felony convictions. I had to develop a program to make this thing work, because the mindset of officers was you just put them in a pen and lock them up and you handle it. You got 60 inmates in a cell with one bathroom that may not be working. And I said, something's wrong here. I'm not going to accept this. I have 4 cells available. So I created a cell where I allowed inmates that wanted to pray. I said, I had this cell for you to pray. If those needed to use the bathroom and needed privacy, you could use the cell for that. Because who wants to defecate in a cell with 60 individuals? Most officers didn't care. They went according to the rules. I broke the rules and I made my own rules. I brought my radio to work and I would play jazz music to create a particular atmosphere. And it was a certain point where I might have a large Latino population. I would switch it and I would turn on the Latin radio stations so those that don't speak English can now listen to Spanish radio and get a sense of news, and at the same time hear music that reflects your culture. I made it a point to bring newspapers in to enlighten people to read. I had old publications in my house that I was no longer reading. I brought reader material in. And I tried to create an atmosphere that people were a little bit more comfortable while waiting to go to court, because that's a very difficult period. You are now preparing to be judged for your crime you committed. And it's very difficult, to see a young man who might be innocent being hit with 25 to life. Or you have that person who's mentally ill and he's in a cell because all the mental institutions have closed. You can have a young man that has Tourette syndrome and you put him in the cell with everybody else. I looked through that and I tried to identify people individually and separate people. The guy didn't want to be with people who's not sociable. I would give guys things to do to keep their minds occupied. I created my own system to try to heal people, and it made a difference. So I took on a position of leadership, and the administration knew I was a good officer, but at the same time, they would whisper about me that he's making them too disciplined. But for me, a lot of these young men represent the men in my community, and I'll try to give them a sense of pride. And when you walk with me, you walk with your head up, and you have a sense of pride. Despite the fact that you might be in a situation, you still have potential to elevate. And don't allow yourself to be defeated. And I took great pride in it. As a military man, when I went down the hallway with them, it was about discipline. And very few officers did that. So I was able to incorporate my military experience, my street experience, and make men out of these men. And what moves me is the letters I received from a lot of young men on social media that said, thank you for saving my life. Thank you for the discipline it gave me. Thank you for allowing me to read the New York Times and you would bring the paper, and it made a difference. I even remember one young man that fell victim to crack. He wasn't even my inmate, but I saw he had potential. He came to court with a suit and tie on as an inmate, and he looked different. And I brought him in my area. He explained to me he had fallen victim to crack. He was here for a warrant, and he was faced with 3 years. I had a good friend that was a lawyer, and I asked him, if you don't mind, can you do me a favor? Can you talk to this young man? The lawyer took his case and got him out. And a few years ago, the young man wrote me and said, if you didn't intervene in my affairs, I would have went upstate for at least 3 to 6 years. So your intervention
Wow.
saved my life. And I
Wow.
get that from a lot of young men who've written incredible testimonies about the impact I had on their lives during their incarceration.
Was there an official prison policy about taking pictures in these institutions that you defied?
I defied, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there was a law, but I defied it because one of the things my father told me early on, and I took it to heart, he says, carry your camera everywhere you go. So as I mentioned, once I was called for the Department of Corrections in 1983, while being investigated for the physical examination by the investigators, I photographed them. So I wasted no time. The academy, I photographed all the instructors and my classmates. Now, when I got to the jail, it was a very interesting thing because I still brought my camera, but I knew you couldn't bring it in. So I first started photographing my coworkers in uniform because a lot of them have never been photographed in uniform. So I'm photographing them in the locker room. And then I developed a relationship with certain supervisors. And just like the officers, they never took pictures in uniform. So I would start photographing them in uniform, giving everybody photographs.
Kill them with kindness, man.
Exactly. That was the strategy. And then I would sneak my camera to my particular housing area where I knew people, and I started to photograph a lot of the inmates in my possession. And somehow I would remember how I got hold of a Polaroid camera that was in the jail, and I started photographing inmates and giving them the photograph. So it was illegal, but I was known to have done it throughout my entire career. As time went on, I became known as that photographer within the department that photographed everybody, you know, the brass, the officers, and I gave everybody the photograph. So yes, I killed them with kindness. And it really was a strategy that I did for the entire 20 years of my career.
Yeah.
Well, this seems like a good time to take a short break. So let's create some space, stand up, stretch, shake it out. If you're already standing, have a seat, relax. And when we come back, we will continue our conversation with the wonderful alchemist of urban culture, Jamel Shabazz.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of the B&H Photography Podcast. Before we continue our chat with Jamel Shabazz, we've got 2 words to share with you. Build Expo. Join us at the Javits Center in New York on June 17th and 18th for the most electrifying live event of the year, and it's absolutely free to attend. Featuring more than 100 speakers across photography, filmmaking, and content creation, Build Expo invites creators of all levels and types to connect, create, and experience the technology shaping the future of visual and storytelling arts. You also get hands-on access to check out the latest gear from over 300 top brands. For more information and to register, head on over to buildexpo.com or click the link in the podcast show notes. And now, back to the show.
And we are back with cultural icon Jamel Shabazz. Now, Jamel, I got to start here. Before the break, we talked about the military, your time as a corrections officer. But a lot of people know you as exactly what I introduced you coming back to the break as, a cultural icon. I mean, look, you're in a hip-hop lyric from Black Thought. That right there is like, I have no words. Podcast host has no words. Go figure. But you've shaped the culture in so many ways. And by culture, you can slice it, dice it, put it on whatever kind of demographic and group you want. I want to talk about you and just that realization that, like, knowing that you have accomplished. I mean, while you're doing it, and I think we talked about it earlier in the conversation, you weren't doing it to be known as anything. You were doing it out of the kindness of your heart. That's who you are. Now,
Yes.
we can play Monday morning quarterback. We can look back in retrospect at your career, and you could say, wow, I did it. Like, I have changed lives. I have shaped the culture. I want to shift to the fun side of things, being in hip hop lyrics, hanging out with Dapper Dan, and a lot of people know you, those iconic images and these people who have stepped in front of your lens, and you have become somebody who has been sought after to the point where people are looking at your catalog of images and being like, man, I grew up in Brooklyn in the 80s. I hope I'm in there. Let me go find out and see if I'm in there. What is that like, man? Can we just have a moment for you to just celebrate your career and look back, and how does that feel?
I'm still really processing it right now. It's an unbelievable journey in which I've been on. I'm happy with the assignment I've been given to be a contributor to world history and culture. It's something I really wanted to do. Because I look back at my youth when I looked at the Life magazine and the various publications, I didn't really see people from my community represented in these books. So I wanted to fill that void. And I wanted to honor folks. Like the picture I just posted on my Instagram page of two young men who just left my home. I felt good because I met them not too long ago, and I vowed and photographed them that I was going to secure their legacy. So they came to my home and I gave them a copy of my latest book, Drama and Flavor, to let them know that I honored my word. And not only did I take the photographs, but you were in a very important book. So now your legacy is being sealed. So it warms my heart to be able to do the books in particular because the books give me a way to let people know that this is what I've been doing, that you are part of a really, some might look at it as a photography book, but to me, it's a history book of a time that doesn't exist anymore. And I honor my word and recognizing your beauty and your spirit, and now you're part of the books. So I was just doing my job. You know what I mean? I don't want anything in return. I just wanted to preserve your existence. And what really makes me feel great is when fathers reach out to me and said that your books allow me to teach my children what life was in a time before crack. You know what I mean? You created a narrative that we could use as talking points to how we dress and how things were. So I embrace that. And I'm just one of many. You know, I'm just very fortunate I've been given the platform to do what I do. But in my various exchanges with other photographers, I realized that there's a whole lot of folks that got work out there. As a strategist, I just understood the importance of using social media and the publishing industry to share what I have because I got to get it out. It doesn't belong to me. What I create belongs to the people. And I've been given this beautiful gift of vision for a purpose. And I think it would be selfish if I just had all this work to myself and not share it. And what really touches me when the young people look at my work and say, it's because of you, I'm a photographer. And I look back at the impact that Leonard Freed's book had on me as a young kid. And now I'm hearing people telling me the same thing about my work. And that really touches me. And the good thing about social media, I'm getting so many of these communications in real time through direct messages. And with that now, I say, you know what, let's get on the Zoom and let's talk. Let me see what I can do to help give you guidance. So I'm happy now that I can join a group of photographers in the past that's now not only developing work, but at the same time helping to develop the next generation of visual image makers.
Man, it's as if I gave you the question beforehand. It's like you couldn't ask for a better response to that. You know, and you had mentioned like, the world before crack, New York before crack and fashion. And I think that's one of the things that stands out to me. It's like when I think about 80s fashion and seeing what New York was like growing up in the 80s and the 90s, like the New York we saw was what we expected it to always be. And now looking at it from 2025, you're like, wow, yeah, it really resonated when you said, a world that no longer exists. I'm like, damn, growing up, we thought it was always going to be like that. And now like New York isn't the same New York. I'm hearing your New York accent and I'm like, man, even the New York accent is a relic of the past.
Yes, so much has changed. And I blame a lot to crack. And I'm so angry behind it. That's why I decided to do the book A Time Before Crack, because a lot of what we saw after crack hit had changed. What it did, what people don't really speak about, it broke up the family. I mean, there's so many layers to it. I think about the Vietnam veteran that came home suffering from PTSD that wasn't really recognized at that time. So he found that short high in smoking crack would help him alleviate the pain. And so much trauma that people went through in general. Because one of the things I found in my trying to help people addicted to crack was they were dealing with trauma. And they needed an outlet. So crack was that medicine that they used. But what happened as time would progress, a lot of parents fell victim to incarceration. Kids were placed into foster care where many were traumatized or some of them were sold sexually. And a lot of trauma came out of the crack epidemic, in addition to the crack, the AIDS, and then we had mass incarceration. So it was that 1, 2, 3 punch that was impacting the community at that time. And I saw the change happen in real time. And it really bothered me. So for me, my work served as a form of visual medicine. For that young woman who was once beautiful that fell victim to addiction, now I'm showing her a picture of herself back in 1981 before she fell victim to crack. And she looks at that picture, she starts to cry. Or the mother that looks at a picture of her son dressed in the latest fashion, with a beautiful glow on his face, beautiful smile, to know that her son fell victim to incarceration due to selling drugs. And now it brings tears to her eyes. So I wanted my books to serve as a form of visual medicine. And many of my works deal with time, a time before crack, seconds of my life, the last Sunday in June. It's all about just recording the time in hopes that my work will serve as, again, visual medicine of a particular era.
Now, a lot of our conversations are reflecting on you imparting your knowledge, your wisdom, you're educating these people, you're helping people through. What effect did they have on you and the conversations that you had? We talked about how you're building these relationships out, how you're having a conversation before the image. What were you learning? And if you look back at the collective body of work and all the conversations you've had, what were things that stand out to you that to this day you remember or shaped the way that you live, that you learned from the people that you were mentoring, you were teaching, you were
Well,
photographing?
it's a combination of things, but I'll start with the first group of people that really sparked my curiosity to get answers. And those were the Vietnam veterans. I needed to understand that war. So one of the first people I met when I came home from the Army, and ironically, I met him in Prospect Park searching for inner peace. The sun had just set, and I'm out there because I'm getting flashbacks of my time in Germany. I'm missing the guys I left behind. And I'm out in the woods. I got my field jacket on, and I'm just reminiscing about my time in the field, and I came upon this gentleman who had on a field jacket as well. And when I asked him, was he in Vietnam? He says he was. And we started to talk about the war and his experience. And the friendship immediately started. And his name is Richard Green. He's an activist within the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. There's a movie made of him. Mario Van Peebles played him. And he was an individual that helped to bring peace during the Crown Heights problem back in the 1990s, that incident where a rabbi accidentally hit a kid and it created a lot of chaos. Richard was that mediator that brought it into play. But I met him in the park, and he was able to answer so many questions I had about Vietnam. And we became really good friends because I realized that I needed to know about this war. It's just not right that it's ended and that's it. It's a dead issue. I need to know. I need to know about you. I need to know about the draft. I need to know about where were you at when Martin Luther King got assassinated. I need to know about the Viet Cong. So through him, we developed an incredible friendship where he became my big brother. He answered all of my questions. And that was important to me. Another situation where I didn't get a chance to photograph him yet, but it's an important conversation. I remember the summer 1972, I'm playing in my community of Red Hook. And I remember this young man coming home from Vietnam. He looked like a giant. He was big, about 6 feet tall, 240 pounds solid with his military uniform on. I remember it was almost like in slow motion as he walked through the community. And I remember just stopping everything I'm doing. I'm watching this individual. And I never forgot him. His face was embedded within my mind. And maybe 5 years ago, I met him on social media and we reconnected. And I said, I was a young 12-year-old kid when you came home from Vietnam. And now I'm meeting you through the social media. And now we have become good friends. So I just wanted to share that because, as I stated earlier, prior to coming home from the Army, when I was about to leave Germany and come back to the States, I sat around with my peers and we listened to conversations that guys in Vietnam were having about the war. So when I left that day, I wanted to know about who these people were. So those are two very important conversations that started a friendship. But my former inmates are the ones that really moved me. The guys who I had when they were 17 years old, 16, that did 30 years. And now one of them I befriended, and I used to send him pictures while he was upstate. And he told me, your pictures helped us to survive. I used to send him, like, I call them my C pictures. They may not have been that sharp. They might have been a little blurry, out of focus. And he told me when he would get those pictures, they gave not only him hope, but other young men that were incarcerated. And he eventually did his 30 years. He changed his entire life around. And now him and I are good friends. So it's those stories that really allow me to know that I was doing some good. My photography was medicine, my mentorship helped. And at the same time, I was able to get a lot of answers from the various questions I've had over the many years that really bothered me.
Jamil, you mentioned earlier that the crack epidemic made you angry. Was that
Yes.
an abstract type of anger, or was that a focused anger as the way you started to understand that this had unfolded in a certain way and maybe had contributors?
There's a lot of factors with that. At that time when crack hit, I'm working in Rikers Island, but I started to see it up close and personal when I transferred to Manhattan courts. And now I'm in arraignment court. I'm in Supreme Court. I'm in felony court. I looked at the sentences that the judges were giving out to those that had fallen victim to crack. And that's when the reality hit me, because in my mind, this person who got caught with crack, he or she really needed rehabilitation versus incarceration. And in many cases, the judges would slam them with incarceration. And that bothered me. When I was doing interviews of people who were getting caught up in the system, I would raise the question to some of them, was your father in Vietnam? Because I got to go back to that idea. When I was doing cell searches on Rikers Island, one of the things that I noticed in these cell searches that were happening over and over and over again, there was photographs in the inmate cell, And it was a picture of his father in Vietnam.
Wow.
So I said, wow, this is the generation. Their fathers went to Vietnam. Some didn't come back. Some came traumatized. So that was in the forefront of my mind as I interviewed thousands of inmates that were in the system. In most cases, when I was doing the interviews, the charge was criminal possession of a controlled substance. And I realized that jail is going to only make you worse. And a lot of them were broken. And that bothered me too, because it's one thing to hear about crack, but now you in front of me as I'm interviewing you, and I'm looking at the impact that crack has had on you. And I'm realizing there's a good person that's there that needed help. And again, going back to when I worked in the arraignment court, I saw the ones that went home versus the ones that stayed in the system. And that was really bothering me, because we needed to find a way to help these people. And at the same time, a lot of the mental health institutions were being closed. So as I stated earlier, the jails became the places where individuals were housed that really needed help. So I focus a lot of my time working with the Vietnam veterans. These guys really need help because I understand PTSD. They had fallen victim to crack, and I want to do the best I can to help them because I strongly believe that their addiction is associated with war. So I took a special interest in them, but really everybody. They really made me angry because something went wrong here, and incarceration is not the answer because it just makes matters worse.
Interesting.
Now, Jamel, looking at your work currently, what is like an average day, week, month of you photographing, and how is it different from looking back over the past 40 years? Do you have a different approach? Are there things that you have learned over time or as you've changed as a person that have affected the way you photograph now?
Totally. So much has changed. First of all, I don't really shoot a lot like I once did. I'm in a zone now where I'm getting older. It's all about archiving, preserving my work, developing book projects and exhibition projects. So I'm not out there in the streets at all like I once was. People try to get me to do it. I can't right now. I'm motivating the young to go out there and do what I once did. Them same streets I walk, you guys go out there and you put in the work, and I'll help you develop a game plan to make it happen. But when I am out there occasionally, I find it's a very different world out there. People are very cold and distant because of the impact that the crack had, the violence had, the trauma. I find that 1 in 3 kids now is traumatized in some way. They don't trust adults. I've been cursed out when I attempt to approach a group of young men and engage them in conversations. So there's a lack of trust. There's a belief that everybody's a police officer. There's a lot of suspicion. With cell phone technology, it's like, why do I need you to take my picture? I can take a picture with my cell phone. So there's a resistance now. And then there's also the distractions where back in the old days before cell phones and headphones, you can actually approach a person and say, excuse me, and speak to them. Today, if I'm on a train, the person is trying to separate himself from everything going on. So they got headphones on. They're distracted. They don't want to be involved, or they think there's some type of gimmick now. Back in the old days, it wasn't like that. I was able to explain myself, gain your attention. But I think that today, a lot of people feel that, there's some form of manipulation if you approach somebody because the trust factor is now dead. So my new style of photography is like when I go to Prospect Park or Century Park, I now use a wide angle lens a lot more. I don't approach people like I once did. Now I do traditional street photography where it's candid images of situations with the wide angle lens. And every now and then, and it's very rare that I would shoot somebody in my traditional style. If the body language is really good, and it might be at a parade because at parades and certain type of festivals, people are very vibrant and they don't mind being recognized. But the photography I once did, where I just walk the streets and approach a person, it's not like that now. A lot of people are suffering. So they might even say to me, you could take my picture, but I want $5 because people are desperate. So it's a whole different frequency, but I still do it. My whole style is different. Once the Prospect Park book comes out, you have an opportunity to kind of like take a glance at my new vision. And it's not really new because I've done it before, but I'm doing it more so now. I'll say the majority of my work now involves me not really speaking to people like I once did because I have to say, with all honesty, it's almost like it's too late. I try to warn people about crack and AIDS and mass incarceration. Now it's over. I don't know what to say anymore. I'm like, I'm lost for words. It's like, I'm just empty. It's happened. Now I'm just looking at the destruction. Now my energy is directed towards young photographers. If I see someone with a camera, now I will approach them, I'll photograph them, I'll engage them because I know that we have a common connection, our love for the craft. But in terms of everyday people, I find it a struggle right now. And I'll try to do it if I see love. I might see a couple that love each other. I still have a way with them. And what I do now, what's different, I might say, you know what? Let me take a picture with my cell phone and I'll send it to you, and now you have a copy. So I found a new strategy to deal with photography today. Or if you really trust me, let me hold your cell phone camera and I'll take a picture, I'll give it to you. And when I do that, they look at it and they're happy. So that's my new strategy in certain situations.
Yeah, it's a different world.
Yeah. I mean, and all that resonates with me where it's just not the same. And then you kind of get in your own head and you're like, is it just me? Am I seeing things differently? Or have I changed as a person? But yeah, the world around us has changed in so many ways. I mean, I think it's like sensory overload now. We're constantly exposed to stimuli and all these different things, and there's negativity all over. And it's rare that you see these instances of positivity and building people up, and people want to connect. And when somebody does want to connect, it's like, well, do they want to connect, or are they about to sell me something? Is there some ulterior motive? So as stark as that is, it's like it's kind of comforting to hear that it isn't just
It's not you.
me, and it's not just, something that, all right, maybe I was in a bad mood that day and I'm just not received by the streets well. It's like, no, I think we as a people are hurting. And again, that's kind of the beauty of photography again, is we can capture that and we can show that. And I think even changing your approach says something about the world we're living in when you start to change your approach and when you pull back and when you start to be more of an observer than an interactor.
Yes.
Now, I want to move to your gear because you did kind of mention moving to a wider lens. I'm like, man, we've been talking for how long? And I'm not even talking about what your daily kit is. What are you bringing out these days?
Well, I'm bringing my iPhone out. That's my baby right there.
Plot twist.
I love my iPhone. Somebody turned me on to the Sony R7. That's my camera I just bring with my 24 to 105 lens, just in case I see something. I got the Leica Q3. I'm still playing around with that. But mainly the camera that I use right now, I have a bunch of them. I'm rolling with my Sony right now. When I'm in my car, I might see something, let's get a shot. That's pretty much it. But to be honest with you, I really don't go out that much. COVID allowed me to finally slow down because I've been moving since I retired. I've been retired now since 2003, and I've been nonstop traveling. I do at least 10 major shows a year, and I was exhausted. So when COVID hit, it allowed me to take time and go into my archives. And through that experience, I'm able to look at my contact sheets and my negatives and time travel back and look at the sequences of events that led me to create these images. And I absolutely love that right now because I'm looking at photographs I have no memory of whatsoever. So I'm scanning now, you know what I mean? And I'm finding stuff that's making my heart smile. I have my father's negatives and I'm looking at his journey now through his images. And that means a lot to me. So that's where I'm at right now. And believe it or not, I could do this forever because I have so much work and I'm developing a number of new book projects and exhibitions, showcasing work that's never been shown before. So that's what my day is like. The streets don't move me. After completing this Prospect Park book, I'm pretty much done. I did a lot of shooting there last year. And nothing, to be honest with you, really interests me at this point. One of the most important projects I worked on was the anti-war movement after 9/11. That was very close to my heart, work I've never really shown before because I wanted to make a difference. I was against the war, and I felt that as a visionary, I can get out there and create images that would bring light on what we were about to embark on. Other than that, I've done it all. I mean, I go back to the idea of themes. I have so many themes for projects that will keep me busy for a long time. So nothing really interests me at all at this point, other than my support base. Because what happens now, when I do exhibitions, a number of people come out to support me and I photograph them. One of the highlights of my career over the past couple of years was a World Photography Day. I gathered up, along with my partner, Howard Cash, a number of photographers, both young and old, and we got together at the steps of the Brooklyn Museum and we did a great day of photography there. And that means a lot to me. I'm curating shows now to help create platforms for other artists. So I can honestly say after 50 years, I'm pretty much done right now. And there's nothing that really excites me. Every now and then I might get out there, but I'm decompressing from my entire journey. You know, there's a lot of trauma and I need this time to really heal myself. So last year, I worked hard to produce books for this year. So my schedule is pretty full for the entire year with all of these new books that are dropping. What comes with that is interviews and exhibitions. So the only photography I do now is I shoot people who come out to my shows and I photograph them. I just meet new friends, both in this country and abroad.
So your Prospect Park book, well, I got to just mention, Prospect Park is really dear to my heart. I grew up, a couple blocks away, and I still live pretty close to the park. But the subtitle, Photographs of a Brooklyn Oasis, is interesting. Because oasis, could mean like, a piece of a landscape that's preserved, that's sort of a place of nature, a respite. But it also could mean something that doesn't change over time the way the rest of the city has. What about your interpretation of Prospect Park? Has it undergone the same type of transformation as the rest of the city, or has it remained somewhat static in the face of all this chaos?
I'll say it's pretty much the same for me. The lake is the same. It's a lot cleaner now than it was back in the day. There's certain places that mean a lot to me. Hurricane Sandy did take out some of the iconic trees that I remembered. I'm glad I documented them. But it's pretty much the same. And for me, it's a sanctuary. It's a place I can go deep into the heart of the woods and just sit and meditate. So that aspect of it is still there. There has been a few changes in terms of now you have a lot of people who are homeless, who need a place to live, and they find that to be a safer place than the shelters or the trains, which I understand. But for me, there's certain areas that still warm my heart from when I was a child going to Prospect Park. So it's a place that I could just find inner peace. The love is still there. That's one place where the pace slows down too. Unlike the concrete where people are moving, I find in Prospect Park, it's a slower pace, and everyone there, for the most part, is searching for inner peace. And I find that there, unlike the streets, I can engage people because we're on a similar wavelength about them being there and photographing them. So this is my most diverse body of work because I have Hindu, I have Christian, I have Muslim, I have Jews. I got everybody I'm able to document. And that work means a lot to me because in many cases, I will not have these conversations on the street because people are moving, but within that park and seeing me and being amongst nature, I find that so many people have opened up to me. So this particular book means the world to me because it shows a side of me that a lot of people have never seen before. That's my ability to connect with people from other cultures and communities.
Jamel, I'm interested about your book process. When you go into a book, how much say do you have? Are you pulling in other people for help culling or sequencing? Can you talk a little bit about the process of putting together a book for you?
For me, it starts with a theme. So I come up with a strong theme first, and then I come up with concepts. And I bring it to publishers. Like Powerhouse, I absolutely love working with them because they've always received all of my ideas. So I came with back in the days, and they immediately saw it. I was new at that time, so they selected the cover. It's a cover I would not have probably picked, but they had the vision to realize that this is the cover that will gain the book international traction. I had a little battle with that, but I said, they know the industry, I'm gonna give that to them. So in most cases, I have creative control in terms of what it is I want. I make it a point to put images in there that speak to the people I photograph. The person might have died. So that's important to me to honor people who have passed away. So by having that photograph in the book, it gives them life. When it comes to selection of images, I like to show love. I stay away from negativity. I don't like any middle fingers. I don't like any guns. I don't like anything that's stereotypical. I like to showcase images that represent pride and dignity. That's very important to me. But in most cases, I do have creative control. With the Prospect Park book, there was a little debate. It's a new publishing company that approached me. So I put the ball in their court, and I wanted something more documentary in terms of the cover of the book to get me away from my pose image, but they really were feeling the pose images that I'm best known for as the cover. So I accepted that. Overall, I had a lot of creative control of what I wanted. I had to stress certain images. This image is very important to be in the book based off who this person is because he's no longer here. But in most cases, it's never a problem. I have control. What was very interesting with the book, A Time Before Crack, before I selected that title, the original title was going to be strictly old school. And I want to get away from that signature style and my work being hip hop and about fashion. So I had the same body of work, but I decided I needed something provocative. So I said, I have to address this crack epidemic because we let this thing pass and we need to know the impact that it had on the community. So I went with my publisher with A Time Before Crack and they were shaking their heads. Said, I don't think so. That's kind of threatening. I don't remember the exact term that they used, but they wasn't feeling it. But I held my ground. I said, no, it has to be A Time Before Crack. And then they went for it and it really worked.
Was that Powerhouse that published A Time Before Crack?
Yes, that was Powerhouse, yes.
So how much do the publishers differ? Does the experience in working with different publishers differ?
Powerhouse, what I like about them, they welcome all of my ideas, and it's no problem. I've developed a relationship with them. They've been in existence now for almost 30 years, and out of the 30 years, I've been with them for 25. So I've come up with them, early on, and my book went on to be a bestseller. To my surprise, back in the days, is in its 22nd edition.
Wow.
So I have a really good foothold within the organization. The first edition sold out in 2 months. The second edition sold out in 2 weeks. So that gives me a little voice within the organization. And I'm happy that I could just reach out to the editor, Daniel, and say, I got an idea. Can I come in? Sure. No proposal, just based off my vision and my ability to market a product. And he was open. With Drama and Flavor was really interesting because the idea of that book came from my frustration with the fashion industry. And I remember the major fashion magazines would approach me and say, Jamel, we want to work with you. We want to give you a 14-page spread and you could do it the way you want. And then when I would go on to embark on the project with my personal ideas, I would bump heads with the creative folks. And it became frustrating for me. So I said, why am I going through all this for 14 pages where I could get a 250-page book and do it the way I want? So I said, I'm done with fashion photography. I'm going to do my own photography book. So Drama and Flavor is that. With the Prospect Park book, to my surprise, a publisher reached out to me and they said, Janelle, what are you working on? I said, wow, this is interesting. I never heard of them before. I said, well, I'm working on 2 projects. I have a Prospect Park book that's close to my heart, and I have a subway body work that's close to my heart. Both of them entail from 1980s to the current. They said, we like your Prospect Park project. We want to do the book. I was blown away by that. And they were open for all the ideas I had in terms of writers and the vision. We went back and forth, and it pretty much worked. Damiani, was the same thing. They approached me out of nowhere. Jamel, would you be interested in doing a book? I wanted to get out of the signature style of posing. So I came up with an idea called Street Life, where it's showing my street photography, unposed images for the most part. And that was important to me because my work was being challenged as not being street photography. So you know what? Let me do a book on street photography. And I did that book. They gave me total creative control. So I always have options as I have 2 books that I like to consider. What did you think? And I go with the publisher because they know what's best. So I always have pretty good creative control and a voice to talk about the importance of my work. Because in most cases, people don't understand the magnitude of the work and why these images are needed to be in this book. And I stand my ground because certain photographs have to be here because of who the people are and what they mean to me. And they become talking points when I do my artist talk to explain the ideas behind the book.
And you've earned that control over having your voice and your vision and what you want in there, rather than somebody who didn't live through this and they weren't there. They weren't creating the photo. They aren't involved in the creation of the image, which you would think, more photographers would have that control. That's where the power of the image is. The power of the image is why you created it and what you're saying and what that moment says.
Yes, and Drama and Flavor is really close to my heart because I work with the designer. He came over here. And I pretty much designed the book. He worked with me. He was flexible. And I told him the importance because it goes back to my father's teaching. When I would watch him put these family photo albums together, that was an art within itself. That was a creative process. And that stayed with me. And with my other book, Albums, the curator, they saw how I put these images together in a sequence. So that was always important to me, my photo albums, which I carried around all the time. A book is the same thing. So it's important that this is a double page spread. It's important that this image goes next to this image because these guys are brothers to each other. I absolutely love how Drama and Flavor came out. It was really a lot of my vision with the designer working with me. And it's really my creative process of just having the images laid out in a certain manner. And having the diversity within the work was very important to me too, which I stand my ground with because I'm often known as an African-American photographer who shot the African-American community, but that pigeonholes me. And I've traveled abroad, so I have pictures from Germany, from France, from Belgium, from Morocco, from Ethiopia. And I want that a part of the process too, because all too often I'm just limited to be the urban photographer. And I want to get out of that. So by me producing these books, I'm able to show people the vastness of my work. And I have to hold my ground when it comes down to the inclusion of that work in the book, because I want to give love to everybody across the seas as well. Like in this new book, Drama and Flavor, there's pictures from Korea and France, and there's group shots. And it means the world for me to let them know that I did not forget them.
So actually, to pick up on the idea that you were talking about earlier, that it's harder for you to photograph these days because the attitude of people have changed locally in New York. Have you found it easier to photograph in these other cities, in foreign locations?
Only as an artist, because they come to my shows now. So I use that as an opportunity because now you know me. You're looking at my work. You're here to see me. So I use that to make it fun for everybody. I want people now to have the experience. You read about me, you have my book, you see in my work. Let's have the experience. If you're not doing anything, let's get some coffee, walk around, and let me make some pictures of you and your children, you and your wife. I do that in every country I go to. And it strengthens our relationship and it allows them to have the experience. But in terms of walking the streets and doing it, I can, but it's more documentary in nature. And it's some very important work, but it's different. When I went to Ethiopia, I had a copy of A Time Before Crack, and I happened to go to a high school that was having a month called History Month. And it's like I stepped back into time, and all of the students were dressed in traditional Ethiopian garment. And this is a beautiful thing because I met somebody on the street who didn't even speak English, and he pointed me to the school because he saw my camera. And I went in there. It's like I went back into time. And nobody spoke English, but I used my book back in the days as a talking point, and I was able to communicate with all of these students. And I spent about 2 hours photographing all of these students dressed in their traditional garment. And that was one of the highlights of my photographic career, using the visual language of photography to connect with people, gain their trust, and photograph them.
Wow. That's great.
Really such a storied career and so much impact over, I was going to say the years, over the decades, man. You've been doing this and inspiring people for so long. You had told us scattered throughout, you have some projects. What is it, 3 books coming out this year?
Right now, Drama and Flavor, I have my copies. It will be released in early June. The Prospect Park book will come out in the fall. And the Tashin book, I'm taking my time with it, so I'm not rushing it. So I'm looking to have that book probably drop in the early part of next year because it's a lot of moving parts to that. I want to really take my time and dig deep into my archive. But we started the process. We have half the images already. It's about just filling in the gaps right now. The main ones coming out now is Drama and Flavor and Prospect Park.
I can't state it enough. I love that control over the vision. And I think a lot of times artists get blinded by, a book deal or, publicity or this or that. And it's like you concede some of that control. And it's like, no, bring some power back to the artist. We created this. We know what we want out there. Let us cook.
Yes.
So Jamel, such an incredible conversation. Can you tell our viewers where they can keep up with you, hear more about your happenings?
The best place right now is really Instagram. That's my spot where I'm able to get out what's inside me, in terms of my ideas and my images. My website, I haven't been on there in a while because what Instagram does for me is what I always wanted from a website, to connect with people. But you can go to JamelShabazphotography.com. I'm doing a wide range of book signings in the coming weeks. I have a show at the Bronx Documentary Center until April 20th. And I'm working on a few projects for the summer that will be revealed in the coming days that are pretty major, where I'm going to be curating some very important shows.
Jamel, you need like a 2-year vacation away from technology, books, cameras, photos.
I do.
Busy man.
I really
Busy
do.
man.
I do. But it's important work that has to be done because, again, my work is visual medicine. The world is hurting right now. And I think that I can make a difference with my work. And I'm happy to be able to develop the next generation of photographers that need direction. And the fact that I'm a living artist, I can help give them guidance. I didn't really have that when I was younger because a lot of the photographers have since passed. So being I'm alive, I'm here to try to guide this younger generation to do the work. There's a lot that needs to be documented. And I'm honored with this new position to serve as a mentor to this new generation.
Wow.
It is so needed. Jamel, huge thank you to you for coming on our program today and blessing us with your guidance and wisdom and experience. And to all of our listeners out there, thank you for joining us today. If you are a fan of the show but are not yet a subscriber, head on over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and please click subscribe. You can also find us on the Explorer blog where we post photos from our guests along with our show notes. And please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast Group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm your host, Derek Fosbender. Jill Waterman is our creative producer. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for tuning in today.